when a scruffy 9-year-old
The
homeless
water's
boy
almost gone,
approached a
and
massive Hell's
I think the
Angel
man
at
at the
a
table knows
lonely
which way
desert
we
rest
went.
stop. Everyone assumed he was begging for spare change. But as he leaned in, his voice trembling, with a fear that went deeper than
The
hunger,
water's
he
almost
whispered
gone,
6
and
words that
I think the man
stopped
at
the
the table
biker's
knows which
hearts.
way we
That's
went.
not my real grandfather. What happened next changed the lives of everyone involved. And the Hells Angels' response shocked the entire town. But before we get into the heart of this rescue, we want to know who is standing with us today. Drop a comment below and tell us which city or country you are watching from. We love seeing how far our brotherhood of viewers reaches. Also, have you ever felt that gut feeling scream that something was wrong? Tell us your story. We read every single one. And if you believe that no child should ever face a monster alone, hit that subscribe button. Now, let's go to a dusty stretch of Highway 50, where the heat mirage hides a deadly secret. The high desert air was a shimmering wall of heat, thick with the smell of parched earth and a bitter, sharp scent of sagebrush baking under the relentless sun. Jax, the president of the local Hells Angels chapter, stood by his blacked-out roadlight, the chrome hot enough to sear skin through heavy denim. He and a dozen of his brothers were halfway through a cross-country run, a journey of silence and iron meant to clear the mind from the chaos of the city. They had stopped at the Devil's Well, a dilapidated rest area that consisted of nothing more than a few cracked concrete tables and a rusted vending machine that hadn't seen a fresh soda since the 9s. It was a place where people only stopped because they had to, because their radiators were boiling over or their eyes were closing from the relentless highway hypnosis of the flats. And that was exactly why the pristine late model white SUV looked so out of place. Parked next to the biker's rugged dust cake machines, it looked like a surgical tool dropped in a dirt pit, far too clean and far too expensive for the grit of the Nevada desert. The vehicle stood as a symbol of a world that didn't belong here, a world of polished surfaces and hidden intentions. Out of the SUV stepped a man who looked like the living embodiment of grandfatherly warmth. He wore a crisp, expensive polo shirt, tucked into khaki trousers with a perfect crease and a pair of gold-rimmed glasses that glinted sharply in the afternoon sun. He was smiling, a wide, practiced smile that seemed surgically attached to his face, intended to broadcast safety and decency to anyone watching. He was holding the hand of a young boy, maybe 9 years old, named Leo. Leo was a stark contrast to the man. His clothes were oversized and stained with the telltale grime of a life lived on the fringes of the city. His hair was matted with dust, and his sneakers were held together by desperate layers of silver duct tape. To any casual observer, it looked like a wealthy, kind-hearted grandfather had finally tracked down his runaway grandson in the urban slums and was bringing him home to a life of safety and structure. The man even made a show of ruffling the boy's hair and offering him a cold bottle of water, speaking loudly so the bikers could hear his benevolent tone. "Stay close, Leo," the man said, his voice a smooth, authoritative baritone that echoed off the concrete bathroom walls. "We're almost home. Your mother has been crying herself to sleep every night. No more running away to live like a stray dog. Do you hear me? We're going to get you fixed up and back where you belong." Jax watched them through his dark lenses. He had spent his life reading people. It was a survival skill in the club where a wrong read could mean a decade in prison or a plot in the ground. Something about the man's posture was too rigid, like a coiled spring disguised as a velvet cushion. He wasn't holding the boy's hand. He was gripping it with a white-knuckled intensity that looked more like a shackle than a gesture of love. And something about the way Leo flinched. A micro-movement, almost invisible to the untrained eye. When the man touched his shoulder set off a siren in Jax's gut. The boy wasn't looking at the man with the resentment of a rebellious child. He was looking at the horizon with the vacant, wide-eyed stare of a trapped animal, waiting for the moment the cage door finally slammed shut for good. Jax felt a familiar phantom pain in his own chest. He remembered being 7 years old, standing in a similar dusty lot while a social worker with a cold smile told him he was going to a better place. He knew the difference between a child who was being rescued and a child who was being abducted. The man led Leo toward the restroom building, but as they passed the line of parked Harleys, the man's phone rang. He stepped away for a brief second to answer it, his back turned, his voice dropping into a sharp, commanding tone that sounded nothing like the gentle grandpa he had been portraying seconds before. It was the voice of a man giving orders, a man used to being obeyed without question. In that split second, Leo moved. He didn't run for the open highway. He knew he wouldn't make it across the burning asphalt before the man caught him. Instead, he darted toward Jax. The boy didn't ask for food. He didn't ask for $1. He grabbed the sleeve of Jax's heavy leather vest, his small dirt-caked fingers digging into the cowhide with a strength born of pure, unadulterated desperation. He leaned in, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps that smelled of stale crackers and raw, unfiltered fear, and whispered the words that changed the temperature of the desert. Please help me. That's not my real grandfather. Jax didn't flinch. He didn't even move his hand toward the knife on his belt. He simply looked down, his eyes meeting Leo's. In that gaze, Jax didn't see a troubled runaway. He saw a raw terror that no child should ever have to carry. He saw a boy who had looked into the abyss and realized the abyss was currently driving a white SUV. Who is he? Jax asked, his voice a low, steady rumble that seemed to anchor the boy to the spot, giving him a gravity he had lacked just seconds before. I don't know, Leo whispered, his eyes darting frantically back to the man who was still on the phone. He found me at the downtown shelter. He told the guards he was my family. He had papers with my name on them, but he's not. He told me if I made a sound, he'd find my mom and make her disappear. He has a box in the back with needles and bottles. He told me I was going on a long sleep. Please, don't let him take me back in that car. I won't come back out. The man finished his call and spun around. The grandfather Lee's smile was gone, replaced by a mask of cold, professional irritation. He saw Leo standing near the massive biker, and his eyes narrowed behind the gold-rimmed glasses. He took 3 long, aggressive strides toward them, his loafers clicking sharply on the pavement like a countdown. Leo, get away from those people immediately, the man barked. He looked at Jax, his voice shifting back into a polite, condescending tone, the kind used by people who believe their bank account makes them untouchable by street people. I'm so sorry, sir. My grandson has been through a traumatic year. He tends to tell absolute fantasies when he's off his medication. It's been a nightmare trying to get him home. Come along now, Leo. Don't bother these gentlemen. They have their own business to attend to and we have a long drive. The man reached out a manicured hand to grab Leo's arm, but he found his path blocked. Jax hadn't moved his feet, but he had shifted his massive frame, becoming a literal wall of leather and muscle between the predator and the prey. At that same moment, Big Mike and T-Bone stepped away from their bikes, flanking the man. The casual, sleepy atmosphere of the rest stop evaporated, replaced by a tension so thick it felt like the air before a lightning strike. He says, "You aren't his grandfather," Jack said, his voice flat and lethal. The man laughed, a dry, nervous sound that rattled in his throat. As I said, the boy is troubled. I have the legal guardianship papers in the glove box. If you'd like, I can call the state police to clear this up. I'm sure they'd love to have a chat with a group of Hell's Angels about a potential kidnapping and interference with a minor. Are you sure you want that kind of attention on your club? It was a threat, a calculated gamble that the bikers wouldn't want the heat of a police encounter. Most people would have backed down, afraid of the paperwork and the legal spotlight. But the man had made a fatal error. He Assumed these men cared more about their own freedom than the life of the boy standing in their shadow. He didn't realize that for the Hells Angels, the only thing more important than freedom was the protection of the innocent. Call them, Jack said, crossing his arms over his chest. In fact, T-Bone. Call our friend, the sheriff in the next county. Tell him we've got a concerned citizen here who's really anxious to show us his paperwork. And while we wait for the law to arrive, why don't we take a look at that box in the back, the one the boy mentioned, the one with the needles. The man's face went from pale to a sickly mottled gray. His eyes darted toward the white SUV, and for the first time, he looked like the prey. He realized the tall tales he had accused the boy of telling were about to be his death warrant. He didn't wait for the sheriff. He made a desperate break for the driver's side door, but he never made it. T-Bone, a man who moved with the speed of a desert sidewinder, intercepted him mid-stride. With one hand, he slammed the man against the side of the SUV, the sound of metal buckling and glass vibrating, echoing across the quiet lot. The boy said, "You had needles." T-Bone growled, his face inches from the man's. "I have a real problem with people who use needles on kids. Why don't you tell us what's in the box before I decide to see if your loafers look better covered in your own blood?" Jax walked over to the back of the SUV. He didn't wait for a key. He used a heavy crowbar from his saddle bag to pop the rear hatch with a sickening crack of plastic and metal. Inside, the scene was a nightmare of clinical, cold-blooded precision. There was an industrial-grade cooler, several pre-filled syringes, and a stack of black leather folders. Jax opened the first folder. It wasn't a family album. It was a catalog. Each page had a photo of a homeless or runaway child, their last known location, their physical traits, and a market price listed in cryptocurrency. There were notes on delivery dates and customer preferences. Leo wasn't being brought home. He was an order being filled for a global syndicate that fed on the invisible. The man wasn't a grandfather. He was a transporter for a network of human misery. The rage that erupted in the rest stop was silent but absolute. The Hells Angels were outlaws, but they were men who lived by a code where the only thing that mattered was protecting the vulnerable. Every man with a death's head on his back looked at Leo and saw their own pasts, their own children, and their own honor. They were the wolves that protected the lambs from the jackals. "Big Mike," Jack said, his voice dropping into a register that made the man in the loafers begin to shake uncontrollably. "Take Leo to the clubhouse. Put a guard on him that doesn't sleep. T-Bone, get the man in the back of the van. We're going to find out where the rest of these folders are located. And we aren't waiting for the sheriff to ask the questions." As the Harleys roared to life, the sound wasn't just an engine. It was a war cry. The white SUV was left abandoned in the dirt, a symbol of a predator who had finally hunted the wrong prey. The Hells Angels weren't just riding home. They were going to dismantle an empire of shadows, one folder at a time. The desert had witnessed many secrets, but tonight it would witness justice. The high desert sun had begun its slow, crimson descent, bleeding across the horizon and casting long, jagged shadows across the cracked pavement of the Devil's Well rest stop. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of approaching rain and the metallic tang of cooling engines. The white SUV sat humiliated in the center of the lot, its rear hatch yawning open to reveal the clinical organized horror of the black leather folders. Jack stood over the man who called himself grandfather, whose real name, according to the encrypted driver's license T-Bone had fished out of his pocket, was Arthur Vane. Arthur was no longer smiling the practiced, benevolent smile of a family man. The mask had shattered completely, leaving behind a pathetic, trembling shell of a human being slumped against the side of his vehicle. His expensive polo shirt was stained with sweat and the fine red dust of the Nevada flats, and his gold-rimmed glasses sat crooked on his face, reflecting the cold industrial resolve of the men surrounding him. Jax looked at the folders again. He felt a physical weight in his chest as he flipped through the pages. These weren't just names, they were lives being treated like inventory. He saw a girl from Oregon, a boy from the docks of San Francisco, and a pair of siblings from a shelter in Vegas. Each one had a status marker. Some were marked in transit, others final sale. The coldness of the bureaucracy was what sickened him the most. It wasn't just a crime. It was a business. The folders, Arthur, Jack said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register that seemed to vibrate through the very asphalt beneath their boots. This isn't just one kid. This is a factory. You're the transport, which means you have a drop-off point. You have a handler waiting for a check-in call that you're about to miss. And right now, you have about 30 seconds to tell me exactly where that is before I let T-Bone show you what a bad trip really feels like. In a place where no one can hear you scream, we are out in the middle of a desert, Arthur. Nobody is coming to save a man like you. Arthur Vane looked around at the circle of bikers. He saw no mercy in their eyes, only a grim mechanical determination. These were men who lived outside the law, but they operated under a code that Arthur couldn't comprehend. He looked over at Leo, who was being gently lifted onto the back of Big Mike's massive cruiser. The boy looked back at Arthur, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the vacant, glassy terror in his eyes was replaced by a flickering, defiant spark of hope. That look seemed to break Arthur more than the threat of violence ever could. He realized that the invisible boy had finally become seen. It's a warehouse in Reno, Arthur stammered, his voice thin and ready, breaking under the crushing weight of the silence near the old rail yards. Section 4. We just bring them there for staging. They get processed, tagged, and moved to the private areas strips at dawn. I'm just a contractor, JS. I don't know the buyers. I just fill the seats and keep them quiet. I was told they were going to good homes. I swear you're lying, Arthur. You saw the needles. You saw the cages. Jax growled, his hand tightening on the man's collar. He turned to his brothers, his eyes scanning the horizon. Mike, take the boy. Go to the safe house near the Tahoe border. Put 2 men on the perimeter and don't let anyone in who doesn't have the password. T-Bone, you and the rest of the crew are with me. We're going to Reno. We're going to close Section 4 before the sun comes up, and we're going to burn their ledger to the ground. If anyone tries to stop us, show them why. The Death's Head is the last thing they want to see. The ride to Reno was a blur of chrome, fury, and the smell of hot oil and asphalt. 30 Harleys moved like a single predatory organism through the deepening twilight, their headlights cutting through the rising fog of the valley like twin blades of white light. They weren't just riding, they were a storm of retribution moving at 90 miles per hour. Jax led the pack, his jaw set, his mind focused on the faces he had seen in those folders. He thought about his own childhood, how many times he had wished for a group of men like this to show up. When he was being moved from foster home to foster home, he felt the weight of every child who hadn't found a biker to whisper to, and it fueled a rage that was cold, focused, and absolute. They reached the Reno rail yards at 11 p.m. The area was a wasteland of rusted box cars, screeching metal, and abandoned industrial shells that looked like the rib cages of dead giants under the pale moonlight. Section 4 was a nondescript, corrugated steel building at the far end of the yard, lit by a single, flickering security light that cast a sickly, jaundiced glow over the gravel. 3 more white SUVs were parked out front, their engines ticking with metallic heat as they cooled in the night air. There were no signs, no logos, only the silent, heavy presence of evil disguised as industry. Jax didn't call for a tactical entry or a quiet negotiation. He didn't believe in giving predators a chance to prepare. He drove his lead bike straight toward the main bay door, the roar of his engine acting as a herald of the violence to come. The Bikers spilled off their machines before the kickstands even hit the dirt, moving with a disciplined military-grade chaos. Jax kicked the side door in with a force that sheared the hinges. The interior of the warehouse was a high-tech nightmare that stood in jarring, grotesque contrast to the rusted exterior. It was filled with modular holding cells, medical stations, equipped with sedatives and a central command desk manned by 3 men in black tactical gear. They reached for their weapons, but they were too slow. The Hell's Angels were fueled by a righteous ancestral rage that made them faster, stronger, and utterly relentless. T-Bone tackled the first guard, sending him through a glass partition with the force of a freight train hitting a brick wall. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the hollow warehouse. Big Mike, having dropped Leo off at the safe house and raced at breakneck speeds to join the fry, used a heavy iron pipe to shatter the electronic locks on the holding cells. The sound of the locks breaking was the most beautiful music Jax had ever heard. Jax headed straight for the command desk. At the center stood a man in a gray suit, the broker. He was frantically trying to wipe a hard drive, his fingers dancing across the keys as he tried to delete the evidence of 1,000 lives sold. The folders found is at the rest stop, Jack said, grabbing the man by his expensive silk tie and slamming his head onto the keyboard with a finality that cracked the monitor and sent sparks flying into the air. Now, the rest of the world is going to find you, and trust me, they won't be as patient as I am. As the bikers cleared the building, they found 12 more children, all of them in varying states of sedation and shock. They were the ones the world had chosen to forget, the runaways who had been lured by false promises, the orphans who had been snatched from shelters, the homeless kids who lived in the cracks of a society that refused to see them. But tonight they were being remembered by the very men the world told them to fear. The bikers, usually seen as outlaws and men of violence, were moving through the warehouse with a startling gentleness. T-Bone, a man with scars across his face and knuckles like stone, was gently picking up a 5-year-old girl and whispering that she was safe now. Jax didn't kill the broker. That would have been too quick, too merciful for a man who traded in human souls. Instead, he made a call to the one person he knew would handle this without the soul crushing red tape of the local precinct. A former angel turned high-ranking investigator in the governor's specialized task force. "We've got a gift for you in Section 4, Jack said into the phone, his eyes never leaving the broker's terrified, bloodied face. "Bring every medical van in the state. Bring the media and bring a lot of handcuffs. We've got the files, the hard drives, and the monsters who thought they were untouchable because they had money. Don't be late, or I might change my mind about letting them live to see a courtroom." By the time the sun began to peek over the jagged snow-capped peaks of the Sierra Nevada mountains, the warehouse was swarming with legitimate authorities. Paramedics were wrapping children in foil blankets, and the broker and his team were being led away in chains, their heads bowed to hide from the flashing cameras of the local news crews. Arthur Vane was already in a holding cell 3 towns away. His paperwork revealed to be a sophisticated web of international forgeries and stolen identities. The investigation would eventually lead to arrests in 4 different states, dismantling a ring that had operated in the shadows for over a decade. Jack stood on the edge of the industrial pier, watching the gray morning light hit the water. He felt a small, timid tug on the sleeve of his leather vest. He turned to find Leo standing there wrapped in a heavy, oversized Hell's Angels hoodie that swallowed his small frame. The boy's mother, who had been located through the encrypted files on the broker's hard drive, was standing a few feet away. She had been searching for him for 4 long months after he was snatched from a city park during a split-second moment of distraction while she was tied up at work. Her reunion with Leo had been so intense that even the toughest bikers had to look away to hide the moisture in their eyes. "Jax," Leo whispered, his voice finally losing its tremor. Replaced by a clarity that only safety can provide. Jax knelt on one knee. So, he was eye to eye with the boy. Yeah, Leo, you really are the man who rides the thunder, Leo said. A genuine toothy smile finally breaking across his face. Jax reached out and ruffled the boy's hair, this time with a gentleness that made Leo lean in rather than flinch away. And you're the boy who stood his ground when it mattered most. You whispered when you could have stayed silent. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you're invisible, Leo. You're a giant among men and you have a family for life now. If you ever need anything, you know where to find us. The Hells Angels didn't stay for the press conference, the official commendations, or the thank yous from the mayor. They didn't want the medals, and they certainly didn't want the headlines. They didn't want the police asking too many questions about how they found the warehouse. They mounted their bikes in a synchronized chorus of thunder that rattled the windows of the nearby office buildings and rode back into the desert. The sound of their engines a fading echo of the justice they had served. The white SUV was crushed in a local scrapyard 3 days later, reduced to a cube of useless metal, stripped of its ability to transport misery. A year later, Leo was no longer the scruffy boy in duct-taped shoes. He was back in school, excelling in his classes, and living in a safe home with his mother. But every Saturday morning, like clockwork, a low rumble would echo through his neighborhood. The neighbors had stopped being afraid long ago. They knew that when the bikes arrived, it meant Leo's uncles were there to take him for ice cream or to help him with his science project. In a small, well-lit apartment in the heart of the city, Leo kept a small silver death's head pin hidden in a velvet box under his pillow. It was his most prized possession, a reminder that even when the world is at its darkest, there are men who ride the thunder, watching the shadows and waiting for a whisper to tell them where the monsters are hiding. The town never forgot the night the Hells Angels came to the rest stop. The local park was renamed Guardian Park, and a new initiative for homeless youth was funded by an anonymous donor that the city council suspected had something to do with a certain motorcycle club's hidden coffers. They learned that sometimes the outlaws are the only ones who can see the truth behind a polished smile. They learned that a leather vest can hold a heart of gold and that a child's whisper is the loudest sound in the universe if you're brave enough to listen and strong enough to act. What would you do if a child whispered for help? Would you look the other way? Or would you ride into the storm? History isn't made by those who stay silent. It's made by those who hear the whisper and turn it into thunder. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever seen a hero in an unlikely place? If you want more stories of courage, justice, and the unbreakable bond of the road, hit that subscribe button and join our family at Embrace the Journey. We believe that everyone deserves a protector and no child should ever be invisible. Thank you for watching and we'll see you in the next story of the